Hi everyone. In this particular demo, I'm just going to go over a brush tray that I made for myself, and it was after a lot of experimenting, a lot of trial and error, that I wanted to see if this system was even going to be worth the time. So what I did was put some of these watercolors aside and went ahead and built this, and I just thought I'd throw out a quick video, number one, to show you what I'm up to, and number two, to give those traditional artists an idea that maybe it might not only help you prevent damage from your brushes, but also keep you more organized quickly. Now, my final brush tray takes a little bit of woodworking tools and a little bit of background information. But what I want to show you is the pieces I use to make it are very common to find and very available and usable just the way they are. Now, one of them is this one right here. This is actually a fluted piece, and what it is just meant for like a fireplace or what have you. And these are usually always 6-inch pieces, and they're meant for you to take them free of charge and just to see if this is the kind of molding you would want in your decor. With that in mind, these are already cut out that I can easily put brushes down in them up to a certain extent this size, but then I have other sizes of crown and cove moldings that I use for bigger brushes, and you'll see that in a minute. But what I want to show you is these are very usable just the way they are. This one here, this one is a bigger piece of cove, and you can see that it is dished out just real nice to hold your brush just the way it is. And then this way, it doesn't take any woodworking experience whatsoever to just get a sample piece like this and lay them down on your work area and then put your brushes, rest them in. And then what happens is they will stick out a little bit over the back for you, so you can just grab it and go. And I actually like this system a lot better than jars anyway, because the brush is ready to go and I'm ready to paint with it instead of pulling it outside down and having to flip it end over end from a jar position. Now, what I did was when I found out that this was going to work a little wee bit better and thought it was worth the time, then what I did was just put a quick one together just to see if it was actually going to help me. And all I did was take 4 small cove pieces and just glued them to another big piece of crown molding upside down. And this way, when I set it on the table, then I put my brushes down, then they'll rest in those grooves, and I can even put smaller brushes in between those, and I'll show you a close-up of that. But what it does is it allows me to keep organized to the point, again, where I could just keep my brushes lined up, grab them, and go. Now, again, something even as simple as this, all you need is a little bit of wood glue or decent glue to hold 4 pieces to another piece upside down, and you'd be ready to go. These, again, are somewhat accessible in most lumber yards that have sample pieces that just to be able to take with you and see if that's the kind of molding you would want in your finished project at home. However, they make excellent brush holders. Now, with that in mind, you probably noticed the tower of inspiration behind me. I'm going to put up a list of all the books back there. That is a larger proportion of all my watercolor books, but I have just as many as acrylic books as that. But then I also have probably more photography books than either acrylic or watercolor. And I just wanted to show you that is how I picked up watercolors and picked up a bunch of the background information and experience and just kept me inspired to keep painting. But these go all the way back to the mid 80s, where I also have some collections of books that are also just plates from the artists like Chet Renison, Edward Siago, the Ogden Pleisner, some of the very good watercolor artists I like to follow that do the style I like, but then also the subject matter I like. But now for you, no matter what style you use, as I always say, and whatever subject matter you use, then just consider just pieces of molding to hold your brushes in place, and maybe they might help you stay more organized. Let's take a look at the actual brush holder more in detail. But first, we're going to take a close-up of just the brushes themselves and the molding themselves, and how much trouble water soaking into the handle can cause you. Let's take a look at that now. Okay, let's take a look at our first sample here. This is an Isabey 4. These are pretty pricey brushes. They're natural squirrel, and I really love them for watercolors. They hold a ton of water and a ton of color to do big washes. But now, this one in particular, you could see that when I stand these brushes upside down in a mug, cup, what have you, I was doing that for a long time. But what I was doing was getting too much cracked handles, and the finish would crack, and that's only because the finish is very brittle. But once the wood starts soaking up the water from the wet bristles over time, it'll start to expand out and it'll start to crack. Now, the cracks in the finish, you can kind of live with those, but what's also happening is when the wood expands out, it's going to stretch out these wires, and those wraps are what keep the brush head on the handle itself. So what I want to try to do is minimize that, and that is when I started laying my brushes flat and let the water drain down instead of back into the handle. Now what I want to do, I'll show you here another one. Now what I had to do, now this is an Isabey 7, which these are starting to get, again, pretty pricey. But what I had to do was, this mop here has a good bit of life to it. It still has a pretty decent shape, but this is the only original wire left. These two I put on myself because it was already, the whole assembly could easily come right off the handle because the handle expanded. Now keep in mind, when the handles dry out, that's when they'll shrink back down, but unfortunately your wire assembly won't shrink back down with it. It's already stretched, and that's the way it's going to stay, and then that's how it gets loose. Now I went ahead and retied these with good nickel wiring that I just by chance happened to have. And when I did that, I saved this brush to a certain extent that I'm sure I can now get a lot more use out of it. Now the wire's a little bit different from the original, but I can live with that as long as the brush works good, and it does. But now what I did was, when I started laying these down a long time ago, I just started thinking about how I could do that. And what I came up with is samples such as this. And all this is a piece of fluted wood that it is actually a piece of molding for such as a fireplace or anything like that, that you could take home with you to see if this is something you would want to use in your building project. Now this one is oak, unfinished, but what I would do is I would get samples like this. This or crown molding works really good, and this way when I have a brush, I could just lay them right in these channels and then just more or less have several different ones ready to go. You can see there's paint and everything on this one, but what I would do is lay a couple of these down, and then all of my good spotter brushes, script brushes, anything, I could do that. But now what I did was decide that this system is working good for me. It's helping me save my brushes. So I just went ahead and stopped what I was doing with my watercolor traditionals and went ahead and made more of a permanent brush tray, so to speak, that I will use indefinitely. Now here's another sample of wood right here. And this one is just a big piece of crown molding. And again, it's the same thing, that this art table is on a angle, so I have to tip it up. But then when I leave it flat, this is how the brushes stay, and I can put some pretty big brushes in a piece of molding such as this. But I have some smaller pieces I used in the final piece, and then I just took two of these and glued them together to make my whole complete bottom tray, and that will hold quite a bit of brushes. And they're all ready to go with the ends hanging off the edge that I could just grab it and go. But also the most important thing about what I found with this is the fact that the brushes are laying down flat and the water will not drain back into the handles and ruin my good brushes. Let's take a look and see what the final brush tray looks like, and we'll talk about it there. Okay, let's take a look and see. Here is the finished product. Now, what I did was, this here is just some larger crown molding, again, just almost like a simple cove. And these three pieces are a little bit bigger than these last two pieces out here. Now, the last two pieces, I have a Lamy Safari and a Pen BBS 267. I'm going to use some of these fountain pens just to touch up my watercolors once they are done, and they will help me with just a little bit of detail and script work after the painting is done. Now, these are the two Winsor Newton brushes that have plastic handles. I normally wouldn't have to worry about, but they still do a good job of keeping all my brushes organized and ready to go depending on what brush I want. And then this one here is the one I just showed you, the number 7, and here's the number 4. And this is a big Isabey 10, which you are correct. 4 more payments and it will be mine. And now, these brushes down here are just spotter scripts. There's a couple of Series 7s. I am trying a new Creative Mark squirrel mop that it's kind of more in a smaller brush setup instead of like a big mop like these guys up here. And then at the bottom, I have just enough room to put some big flats down that I took my first tray, so to speak, of the 2 fluted pieces of wood, glued them together, and then just made the tray itself about 1.5 inches or so off of the table, just to give me like an unofficial third tray to be able to put big flat brushes underneath. Now, this should work good for me because I've been using these kind of cove samples and crown samples and the fluted samples for a long, long time. So I went ahead and just decided to put something together, and then I went ahead and cleared it with lacquer that does a really good job just keeping the poplar the way it looks, but then also just protecting it as far as any kind of acrylic or watercolor paint stains from it. And so hopefully I'll get a good bit of life out of it too. But with these in mind, now obviously whatever woodworking you come up with to make something such as this may be limited to your experience and your tools. But keep in mind, if you want to try to grab a sample of any type of molding and set it down on your workplace and just use it as is, there is no background information or knowledge needed for such of an operation such as that. So this way you could look around, maybe if you think it might help you to keep more organized, whether it be anything, colored pencils, whether it be even pastels, anything, that these types of pieces of sample molding pieces work really well for the artist. So now, with that in mind, I hope this particular just quick sample of something that maybe will help you with your artwork and your setup will help you and keep things organized, but most importantly, to keep your brushes safe from water contamination and problems, that they don't expand out a good quality handle and lose what could be considered quite a bit of life of a good quality brush. So with that in mind, until I see you out in the field or back at the studio, thanks for watching.